Hello there. In our last class, we talked about CSS classes, and I showed you how developers use CSS classes to translate our design styles into code, right? So you're able to understand how developers um, takes our colors, our paddings, our margins, our strokes and borders, and translate them into um, UI components to replicate the exact same thing that we have designed in our Figma file, right? Now, one of the things that I mentioned was that it's possible for them to use the name of your layers as a CSS class name, right? So today, I'll be showing you different naming conventions that you can implement in your design to rename your layers, which will help in your workflow and in your communication and collaboration with your developer or every other stakeholders in a project that you're working on, right? So let's get started. Why is this important, right? So looking at these two buttons on our screen, you will notice that one says metrics card and the other says frame 5C79, right? And one obvious difference is that one is very readable and the other is very ambiguous, right? So you can't tell the difference between the content of frame 5C79, but you could possibly guess the content of frame metrics card, right? So that's easy to read is one of the reason why it's important that you name your layers, and you name your layers intentionally, right? Now, let's look at what each of these cards contains. So if you look at this card, you see that it has a card component here, and you see the names of the layers here, right? So now one obvious thing that you might notice that on the layers, you see that we just have frame this, frame that, frame that, frame that. There is no name attached to any of them, so you can't tell what each of those layers represent on the UI card, right? So now, but what we can do, however, is to implement a better solution by using a naming convention. So you see here we have metrics card, so we know, oh, now I understand. So we have these names, then we have the card title, we have this title div, value div, data group, and all of that. So it becomes more easier to relate which of these layers is referring to which of the elements on the card UI, right? Now, also, when the developer is going to code this out, they might decide to use metrics card or card div as a class name for this UI component. So by so doing, you have eased that collaborational effort, so they don't have to think about what name should I call this UI component. You have already done the job for them, so they just have to copy it and translate it for you, and you will see your design in code. All right, so now, but you might wonder, okay, now that I know why it's important, how can I actually name my layers? They are not a random affair. It's something that you have to intentionally think about, and also how you are going to implement them. So some good rule of thumb is to make sure that your layer is readable, is meaningful, is relatable, is simple, right? However, there are conventions that web development professionals use when they are implementing their classes or their components, right? So we have these 4 popular conventions. There are actually more than 4, but these 4 are the most popular that both front-end, back-end database developers use when they are naming their classes or naming their components or naming their functions, right? So we have the camel case, the Pascal case, the snake case, and the kebab case. Now, you notice that for each of these conventions, there is no space in between the words, right? There is always, they are named as one word, so they can be separated by a dash or a hyphen, as in kebab case. they can be separated by an underscore as a snake case. However, for the camel case and the Pascal case, you notice that for the camel case starts with a small letter in the first word, then the next word starts with a capital letter. Then in Pascal case, we have each of the word in the name starts with a capital letter. Right, now you see that quickly in this reference here. So you see we have the camel case profile card. The profile starts with the small letter and the capital letter for the next word card. Then for the transact card on the Pascal case, we see we have transact in capital letter T, then capital letter C in card. However, for the user profile and the date picker, you see that the snake case is separating it with an underscore and the camel case is separating it with a hyphen, right? So these are one of the most popular ways that developers use when they are naming their components or their styles or their functions. So I think is a very good practice for us designers, since most of our design are going to be translated into code, to emulate what they are doing and use this pattern in naming components, right? So now there are also other factors that you have to consider when you're naming your layers. Now you know there are 4 of the most popular ways to name your layers, right? But it doesn't stop there. So you have to consider some things like elements, the specific elements you're trying to work on, then the choice of the developer, the product specific, and the framework specific. Now, what I mean by element specific is this. For instance, if I show you this UI components here, there are 2 the same components, right? But inside this design, we have a form, right? And in web development, there is a standard that form is created with. So the HTML structure of a form. So for a form, we have the inputs, right? We have the input, we have the submit or the button, right? So for the input, we have the regular input, then we have the test area, then we can have different kind of inputs, email, we can have phone number, we can have maybe even date speaker, right? Now for this particular UI, we have a test area, we have a URL input, we have an email input, right? Then we have a button. So a good practice when you're trying to rename this layer will be to think about what is this component all about. So you see that when we look at the name, we have audit application, and we have frame 21, right? So by looking at these two components, you can easily interpret what this form is, maybe to apply for audit, right? But looking at the name for this other one, you can't really tell what it is without reading the content of the design, right? And the goal is to reduce that ambiguity and improve, that readability of your layers. So if you look at the layer structure of this particular component, you see that it starts with a name, audit application. Now, if you open it, we have a div. Now, like I made reference in the previous video, which you can watch by clicking the link above, you remember I said that for every frame you create on a Figma or on your Sketch or any other app you use for your UI design, for every frame you create, you are creating a div block, and that is the basic structure of frames in web development, right? So now, but inside this div, we have the title div, which contains all the titles, the content for this particular form, right? But it's not part of the form, you get? Now, but if you look at the next frame here, we have our form content. So I named it form because I know that when a developer is trying to create a form in HTML, the basic format for a form starts with what is called a form tag, right? So you have this form tag, then every other thing inside it is going to be part of the form. That is the only way that the web interprets that particular element as a form, because it has that form tag. So that is why I named it form tag. So you see that it's element specific, because I understand that, oh, this particular content of this UI is a form. So inside the form we have input groups, right? However, inside each input group, there is one particular one that is most important, is the input, right? So you see I named it input because in an element, in a form element, we have inputs, we have submit, we have button. So you see that for each of the input, I named it input. And that is also important, so that when a style is being applied to a class named input, it will apply to all of these two elements here. So the developer don't have to create it two times. You just have to create one style with the class name input, right? Now, the same thing goes on to the final version section here, which is the form. So inside it we have the button, and for a basic HTML form we have the button tag, right? So it can be a button tag or a submit tag. So by naming it this way, I've been able to interpret the layers to resemble the basic form of a HTML form that the developer is very familiar with. Now you don't have to, it makes it easier for them to actually understand what is going on in your design, right? Now another option would be developer's preference. So it's very important that while you are making your changes in your layers, if you have access to discussing with whoever is going to develop the project, it's good to learn from them how they actually implement their naming conventions, so that you can replicate it. And when you replicate what they are familiar with, it becomes much more easy for them to interpret, because they know what they are seeing on the screen. They are very familiar with the names you've given them, right? Which also means they don't have to rename it, which reduces the workload for them. And of course, every developer will want a designer that reduces workload for them. So now, alternatively, you can have product-specific naming. So in our next reference, in our next example here, you see that there is this UI card for a dashboard. So this is a dashboard for a blockchain app, and we have this metrics card that has metrics section that has 3 cards in it. So you have these 2 cards that resemble themselves, then it has this graph, right? Now it will be ideal that you rename it to interpret what is on the design itself, right? So you see that on this particular card here, I've named it chart card, right? So if I'm talking about this particular component to a developer or to my product manager, I can easily make reference to telling him or her or whoever they are to reference card chart components or in the Figma library. So instead of telling them to reference frame 579, right? So it makes more sense. And also, when you're talking about product specific, it can also refer to how maybe the company you're working with, how they have created as their naming conventions, right? So if you're working in an established company, they probably have established standard on how they name their components, right? So it might affect how you name your layers. Now, the last one I want to make reference to is a framework specific. So for front-end web development, there are a lot of UI libraries or frameworks that front-end developers use to translate our designs to code. And some of the popular ones is the Tailwind CSS, Material UI, Ant Design. There are lots more other options out there, right? And this libraries or UI components, or UI library or frameworks, they have different naming conventions. So you see that Tailwind CSS, which is very popular, names their layers or their components or their styles with kebab case. So you have text field separated by a hyphen, right? But Material UI uses Pascal case, so we have table row. So you see that in our previous example where we're looking at the form for a table, a HTML table, if you see a row, it is called row. It's not called table row. However, for Material UI library, they call their table row instead of row, right? So you see that difference, right? Now, if you go to Tailwind CSS, they may call their table row a different name. So if you know the framework that your developer is going to use, or if you know the framework that your company uses for their development, I think it's a good practice for you to actually replicate the naming conventions of that particular library or framework in your design. That way, whoever is looking at it is already familiar with the names, and it makes communication easier. It makes productivity even more faster, right? So, and the last one is Ant Design, which uses both Pascal case and Camel case, and where it is used is depending on whether it is a CSS style or maybe it's a component or a JavaScript function, right? So you see different kind of naming conventions where you have like date picker with a Pascal case, then we have payment card with a Camel case. So now these are all very good practices, and the good thing about this is that once you begin to look at these different conventions, it helps you as a designer to understand how you should name your layers. Once you understand these conventions, it helps you as a designer to know how you should name your layers, and it helps improve the way you communicate, the way you work, the way your other stakeholders interpret your design. Imagine a world where you join a new company and you go into their Figma file, and every layers or every design is called frame. I mean it's going to be a lot of work for you to interpret and consume the entire design. But if it is well organized, well structured, the names are well done, you see that it becomes more and more easier for you to translate and interpret what is going on and get yourself onboarded into the design file and start creating your designs, right? And the good thing about naming convention is that there is always room for improvement, right? So you see we have here on Figma where we named some of our layers as maybe card div or card title. You can always find a way to improve them in the near future, right? And by so doing, you begin to learn more about how to iterate on your naming conventions. I hope this video has been helpful, and I will be so glad if you're able to share it with your colleagues and friends, and of course hit the like button and subscribe, and I look forward to sharing with you more insightful concepts and ideas on how to improve your design. Thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye bye.